The wind howled through the bare branches outside Hampshire Manor, rattling the old windows of the ancient palace. The February chill seeped through the walls, making 12-year-old Holly Hampshire shiver as she tiptoed down the dimly lit corridor. Her older sister, Lily, followed closely behind, holding a flickering candle that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The two sisters had always been drawn to the mysterious parts of the manor, and tonight their curiosity led them to a room they had seldom visited. The room was filled with antique furniture, heavy drapes, and an assortment of paintings that lined the walls. Most of the portraits were of their ancestors, stern and imposing figures who seemed to watch their every move. But there was one painting that stood out, a large, ornately framed picture of two strangers dressed in old-fashioned attire. The figures were a man and a woman, both with expressions that seemed almost too lifelike, their eyes following the girls wherever they moved. "Who do you think they are?" Holly whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. Lily shrugged, her eyes fixed on the painting. "I don't know. I've never seen them before." The girls studied the painting for a few moments longer, feeling a strange sense of unease. The man's eyes were dark and intense, while the woman had a peculiar smile that sent shivers down their spines. Holly noticed a detail she hadn't seen before: a gray cloak draped over the woman's shoulders, blending into the background. "Let's go," Lily said, pulling Holly's arm. "It's getting late." Reluctantly, Holly turned away from the painting, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As they left the room, she glanced back one last time, half expecting the figures to move. They remained still, yet their presence lingered in her mind. The next morning, the manor was bustling with activity. Their cousins, James and Emily, had arrived for a visit, and the four children quickly fell into their usual routine of exploring the vast estate. It wasn't long before Holly's thoughts returned to the mysterious painting. "There's something weird about one of the paintings in the West Wing," Holly said to her cousins during breakfast. "Want to see?" Intrigued, James and Emily agreed, and the four of them made their way back to the room. The painting looked the same at first glance, but Holly's heart skipped a beat when she noticed a crucial difference. "Wait," she said, pointing. "Where's the man?" The others stared in disbelief. The man had vanished, leaving only the woman with her unsettling smile and gray cloak. "This is impossible," Lily muttered. "Paintings don't just change overnight." Emily leaned closer, her nose almost touching the canvas. "Maybe it's a trick of the light." James shook his head. "No, he's gone." "But how?" As they puzzled over the missing figure, the atmosphere in the room grew colder. Holly felt a prickle of fear run down her spine and turned to see a faint gray image hovering near the doorway. It was the tall woman from the painting, her eyes now fixed directly on Holly. The woman's cloak billowed as if caught in an unseen wind, and her presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. "Do you see that?" Holly whispered, her voice trembling. The others turned to look, their faces draining of color as they saw the ghostly figure. The woman began to move, gliding silently across the floor towards them. Panic surged through Holly, and she grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her towards the door. "Run!" she shouted. The children dashed out of the room, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The ghostly woman followed, her image growing more solid with each passing moment. Holly could hear the soft rustle of her cloak and the faint whisper of her name being called in a voice that seemed to come from all directions. They reached the grand staircase, but Holly stumbled, feeling a cold hand brush against her ankle. She screamed, scrambling to her feet as Lily and the others helped her up. The ghostly woman was now at the top of the stairs, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "Get to the library," James shouted, pointing to a door at the end of the corridor. They burst into the library, slamming the door behind them. James and Emily pushed a heavy bookshelf in front of the door, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The room was filled with the scent of old books and dust, and the children huddled together, their hearts pounding. "Who is she?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Holly replied, her eyes wide with fear. "But she was in the painting. She must be some kind of ghost." Lily's eyes were fixed on the door, which now rattled as if something was trying to get in. "Why is she after us?" Before Holly could answer, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the fire in the hearth. The ghostly woman appeared in the center of the library, her form more solid than ever. Her eyes were filled with a dark, unfathomable rage, and her voice echoed in their minds. "You should not have come here," she hissed. The children backed away, their fear paralyzing them. The woman's cloak seemed to expand, filling the room with the gray mist that obscured everything. Holly felt herself being pulled towards the woman, her strength ebbing away. "Please," Holly begged, "leave us alone." The ghost's face twisted into a cruel smile. "You belong to me now." As the gray mist enveloped them, Holly felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had known the ghost all her life. The woman's voice grew softer, almost soothing. "Come with me, Holly," she whispered. "I have so much to show you." Holly's vision blurred, and she felt herself slipping away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the woman's eyes, filled with a terrible, unending sorrow. When Holly awoke, she was alone in the painting room. The other children were nowhere to be seen, and the painting had changed once more. Now, the woman stood alone, her eyes locked onto Holly's with an expression of triumph. Holly's heart raced as she realized the truth. The woman wasn't just a ghost, she was a part of the painting, a cursed soul trapped for eternity. And now, Holly feared, she might be trapped too. Holly's eyes darted around the room, seeking any sign of her sister and cousins. The painting loomed ominously, its colors more vivid than before. The woman's eyes seemed to glow with a sinister light, her expression a mix of triumph and something else, anticipation. A cold dread settled over Holly as she realized the full extent of her predicament. She was alone in an ancient manor, facing an entity that defied all logic and reason. Her thoughts raced as she struggled to remember any stories or lore that might help her understand what she was up against. Just then, the door creaked open, and Holly's heart leapt into her throat. She spun around, half expecting the ghostly woman to be standing there. Instead, it was James, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Holly, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Relief washed over her, and she rushed to his side. "James, where's Lily and Emily? Are they safe?" James shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. I woke up in one of the other rooms and couldn't find them. But I saw something." "What did you see?" Holly pressed, her fear mixing with a desperate need for answers. "It was her," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The woman from the painting. She was searching for something. I think she's trying to find us." Holly felt a shiver run down her spine. "We need to find Lily and Emily and get out of here." As they stepped out into the corridor, the manor seemed even more foreboding than before. Shadows danced along the walls, and the sound of the wind outside mingled with the distant echo of footsteps. The two of them moved cautiously, every creak and groan of the old building setting their nerves on edge. They checked room after room, their anxiety growing with each passing moment. In one room, they found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. Holly picked it up, her hands shaking as she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, yet the entries spoke of dark times and strange occurrences within the manor. "Listen to this," Holly said, reading aloud. "February 16th, 1824. The presence grows stronger with each passing day. The woman in the gray cloak appears more frequently, her gaze piercing my very soul. She whispers my name in the dead of night, and I fear for my sanity." James' eyes widened. "That sounds just like what we're dealing with." Holly nodded, flipping through the pages. "There's more. February 20th, 1824. My brother has disappeared. The servants whisper of a curse, a punishment for disturbing the restless spirit that haunts these halls. I fear that we are all doomed to join her in her eternal torment." As they read the final entry, a chill filled the room. The temperature dropped, and the sound of footsteps grew louder, more distinct. Holly and James exchanged a fearful glance, then turned to see the ghostly woman standing in the doorway, her eyes burning with malevolence. "You should not have read that," she hissed, her voice echoing through the room. Holly and James backed away, but the woman's presence seemed to fill the space, leaving them with nowhere to go. Her gray cloak billowed around her, and Holly felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over her. "We have to get out of here," James whispered urgently. Holly nodded, but as they tried to move, the woman raised her hand, and an invisible force pinned them to the spot. "You will not escape me," she intoned. "You belong to the painting now." Desperation fueled Holly's next actions. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver locket that had belonged to her mother. Holding it tightly, she stepped forward, hoping to use it as some sort of talisman against the ghostly figure. "Leave us alone," Holly shouted, her voice breaking with fear and defiance. The woman recoiled slightly at the sight of the locket, her eyes narrowing. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. Holly clutched the locket tighter. "It was my mother's." For a moment, the woman's expression softened, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But it was quickly replaced by anger. "It does not matter. You are still mine." The force holding them in place seemed to weaken, and Holly took the opportunity to grab James' hand. "Run!" she cried, pulling him towards the door. They bolted down the corridor, the woman's furious wail echoing behind them. The manor seemed to twist and shift around them, doors appearing where there had been none before, and familiar hallways leading to unknown parts of the house. It was as if the building itself was conspiring to keep them trapped. Panting and terrified, they stumbled into a small, hidden room they hadn't seen before. The walls were lined with old books and artifacts, and in the center stood a pedestal with an ancient, ornate mirror. The mirror's surface shimmered with an eerie light, and Holly felt drawn to it. "James, look," she said, pointing to the mirror. "Maybe there's something here that can help us." As they approached the mirror, Holly noticed an inscription around its frame. It was written in a language she didn't recognize, but as she traced the letters with her fingers, the words seemed to come alive, shifting into a form she could understand. "To free the cursed, one must face the past," she read aloud. "The truth lies within." James frowned. "What does that mean?" Before Holly could respond, the mirror's surface rippled, and an image began to form. It was the painting, but this time, the man and the woman were both present. The scene was different, though they were in the very room Holly and James now stood in. The man was holding the same locket Holly had, and the woman looked distressed, her expression one of sorrow rather than malice. As they watched, the scene played out like a silent movie. The man tried to hand the locket to the woman, but she recoiled, her form flickering as if she were caught between worlds. The man placed the locket on the pedestal and stepped back, his face etched with determination and sadness. Suddenly, the woman screamed, a soundless cry of agony, and her form dissolved into the gray mist that Holly and James had encountered. The man fell to his knees, his expression one of utter despair, before he faded away, leaving the locket behind. The mirror's image shifted again, showing the manor in a state of disrepair, years passing in the blink of an eye until it reached the present. The final image was of the locket, now held in Holly's hand. "It's a message," Holly said, her voice trembling. "The locket is the key. We need to return it to the painting." James looked skeptical but desperate. "How do we do that?" The answer came in the form of a sudden, violent gust of wind that tore through the room, lifting the locket from Holly's hand and carrying it towards the painting room. The children followed, their footsteps echoing loudly as they ran. When they arrived, the painting had changed once more. The woman was alone again, her eyes filled with rage as she saw Holly and James enter. But there was something else, a flicker of fear as she noticed the locket floating towards the canvas. "No!" the woman screamed, her voice shaking the very walls of the manor. "You cannot undo the curse." But the locket continued its path, drawn by an unseen force. It pressed against the surface of the painting, and the woman let out a piercing wail. The canvas seemed to ripple and distort, and the room was filled with a blinding light. When the light faded, the painting was whole again. The man and woman stood together, their expressions peaceful. The locket was no longer in Holly's hand but was now part of the painting, resting in the man's palm. The ghostly woman was gone, her presence no longer haunting the manor. Holly and James stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. "Did we do it?" James asked, his voice barely audible. Holly nodded, her eyes fixed on the painting. "I think so. I think we freed them." As they turned to leave, a soft, warm light filled the room, and the temperature rose, driving away the February chill. The manor no longer felt hostile and oppressive but seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. They found Lily and Emily in the next room, both of them unharmed but shaken. Together, the cousins made their way back to the main hall, where the first rays of dawn were breaking through the windows. "We should tell someone about this," Emily said, her voice shaky. "Someone needs to know what happened here." Holly agreed, but as they walked out into the fresh morning air, she couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with the supernatural was far from over. The locket might have been the key, but there were still so many unanswered questions. What had caused the curse in the first place? And were there other spirits trapped in the manor, waiting to be freed? As the sun rose, bathing Hampshire Manor in its golden light, Holly made a silent vow to uncover the truth. She knew that the manor held many secrets, and she was determined to reveal them all. Holly, James, Lily, and Emily returned to the grand hall, feeling a sense of tentative relief. The first light of dawn seeped through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the marble floor. The air was warmer, the oppressive chill of the night seemingly banished. For the first time since the ordeal began, the children felt a glimmer of hope. "We need to tell Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert about what happened," Holly said, her voice steady despite the lingering fear. As they approached the main entrance, the door creaked open, revealing their aunt and uncle, who had clearly been searching for them. Their faces lit up with relief at the sight of the children. "Thank heavens, you're all right," Aunt Margaret exclaimed, rushing forward to hug them. "We were so worried." Uncle Robert's stern expression softened. "Where have you been?" "We've been looking everywhere." Holly exchanged a glance with James. "It's a long story. We found a ghost, but we think we've set things right now." Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert listened in stunned silence as Holly recounted the night's events. Their faces grew pale, and Aunt Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched her husband's arm. "A ghost, you say?" Uncle Robert finally spoke, his voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "In the old painting room." Holly nodded. "Yes, but we used the locket to free them. The spirits should be at peace now." Aunt Margaret's eyes widened. "The locket? You mean the family heirloom locket?" Holly felt a chill. "Yes. Why?" Aunt Margaret's face turned ashen. "That locket was cursed. It was supposed to bind the spirit, not free it. We thought it was lost years ago." Panic surged through Holly, but the mirror showed us what to do. It said the locket was the key to ending the curse. Uncle Robert shook his head gravely. "The mirror? You mean the scrying mirror in the hidden room? That mirror is dangerous. It shows you what you want to see, not the truth." The realization hit Holly like a cold wave. They had been manipulated. The ghostly woman had tricked them into releasing her, and now the manor would pay the price. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the light of dawn. The shadows deepened, and a familiar, chilling presence filled the room. The ghostly woman materialized before them, her eyes burning with malevolent triumph. "Foolish children," she hissed, her voice echoing through the hall. "You have freed me from my prison, and now I shall have my revenge." Holly and the others backed away in terror as the woman's form solidified. She was no longer a mere ghost but a powerful, malevolent entity. The manor itself seemed to tremble in her presence. "You thought you could defeat me with a mere trinket," she sneered. "Now, you shall all suffer for your arrogance." Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert tried to shield the children, but the ghost's power was overwhelming. She raised her hand, and an invisible force lifted them off their feet, slamming them against the walls. The children screamed in terror as the ghost's laughter filled the air. "You will never leave this place," the woman declared. "You are mine now, just as those before you. Your souls shall feed my power for eternity." The walls of the manor began to warp and twist, the ancient structure groaning under the weight of the ghost's malevolence. The portraits on the walls distorted, the faces of their ancestors twisting into grotesque visages of pain and fear. The manor itself was becoming a prison, a living nightmare from which there was no escape. Holly struggled to her feet, her mind racing. There had to be a way to stop this. They couldn't let the ghost win. But as she looked into the woman's eyes, she saw nothing but endless darkness and hatred. The ghost was too powerful, her curse too strong. "Please," Holly begged, tears streaming down her face. "Let us go." The ghost's expression softened for a moment, but then her eyes hardened. "You do not understand. I am bound to this place, and now, so are you. There is no escape from the darkness that binds us." With a wave of her hand, the ghost summoned the gray mist that had once filled the room. It swirled around them, suffocating and cold. Holly felt her strength ebbing away, her vision dimming as the mist enveloped her. The last thing she saw was the ghost's triumphant smile as the darkness claimed her. The manor fell silent, the echoes of the children's screams fading into nothingness. Outside, the dawn broke, but its light could not penetrate the cursed walls of Hampshire Manor. Years passed, and the manor stood empty, a place of whispered legends and ghost stories. No one dared to enter, for it was said that those who did would never return. The painting in the west wing remained, now showing not just the man and woman, but also for children, their faces frozen in terror. And in the quiet, desolate halls of Hampshire Manor, the ghostly woman watched, her eyes ever watchful, ever waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to enter her domain. The curse had claimed new victims, and the manor's dark legacy continued. The end.